We're right around the corner from a new week of NFL football, and today we're going to be taking an early look at some top waiver wire candidates for Week 8 fantasy football. These are players that, surprisingly, left and right, there have been churning out names that can have long-term contributions to our teams, that can help us in pinches and needy situations with injuries taking place and unfolding in this past week's games, and ultimately provide a helping hand to our lineups as we move forward throughout this season. So today I'll be covering between 10 and 15 different players between basically all positions here in the fantasy football game that we'll be covering, and obviously, again, helping your teams out here long term as must-add players for Week 8 fantasy. So, as always, if you're new around here, drop down, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and with that said, let's dive in. Here we go. So we're going to kick off today's episode talking through some priority adds at the running back position for Week 8 fantasy football, breaking things down here and getting kicked off with Gus Edwards of the Baltimore Ravens, the first name we'll be covering in today's episode. So for Gus Edwards, this one's simple here. He has a proven track record of fantasy football success, filling in stints for this Ravens offense as the team's lead tailback. Now, his skill set isn't the most dynamic in the world. He's not a phenomenal pass catcher out of the backfield, but what Baltimore asks their running backs to do, Gus Edwards' skill set aligns very well with that. His power traits, his ability to keep his legs churning, his goal line capabilities, he checks those important and critical boxes for this offense. So it's really no surprise that dating back to 2018, since and when his name is called upon here, he's been able to answer the bell and, turn out those numbers you're looking for in lineups. So this week, he returned off the injured reserve. It's been a 13-month recovery process for him since suffering a 2021 season-ending injury. Of course, him and J.K. Dobbins have kind of been going through it here as of late. The reason, of course, for Gus Edwards' emergence into the fantasy scene right now is that we're not going to see J.K. Dobbins until Week 12 at the earliest. So you've got yourself a handful of games here that you're going to have the opportunity to pick up a starting level running back that can supplant some of those needs for your lineups and really fulfill that role of being a starting caliber player here. So, of course, for J.K. Dobbins, it was he had the ACL injury, and then he kind of injured that last week. Things stiffened up on him, and then he had arthroscopic knee surgery, and it's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks. So it could be a longer time frame here for Gus Edwards as well. You could push into a month plus in terms of his utility for teams. But in this first start of the season, his first action of 2022, 16 carries, 66 yards, averaging over 4 yards per clip. Very, it's not amazing, but it is kind of requisite what you look for in terms of efficiency here, and scored 2 touchdowns as well. So, again, going back to that goal line utility, the ability to punch balls in and get those super valuable touches that go the farthest in this game. So, for Gus Edwards here at 41% rostership, definitely prioritize him in leagues this week. D'Onta Foreman, my next priority add here. This actually, depending on your league format, depending on your strategy long-term here, your needs and depths at the running back position, this may be a higher priority add for some of you. And I went out in all my leagues. I have a share of D'Onta Foreman because he was essentially unrostered to the extent of watching Thursday Night Football and having the breaking news at the time that Christian McCaffrey had just become a San Francisco 49er. So what you're getting here in D'Onta Foreman is a player that long-term has lineup utility, because as long as he's healthy and out there on that football field, he's going to see valuable touches when they come about. Now, the problem for Foreman and for this Panthers offense, which shockingly didn't, show their face this week, is the fact that this is a really poor offense. This is a team that struggles to consistently move the football. They did beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 21-3, an 18-point margin of victory after being 13-point underdogs on a lot of sports books entering into the contest. That's not necessarily what we expect from them on a week-to-week, a day-to-day basis here. So I definitely think we'll see some regression. I'm not really sure where that type of energy and level of play came from today. It was more so, I think, a lacking performance from Tampa than it was really a strong, and not to take credit away from these guys, but there are limitations here offensively in terms of the ceiling that they can get to. But Foreman was phenomenal in this game. We're going to talk about his teammate Chuba Hubbard here in just a second, so I'm not going to be super long-winded with Foreman because a lot of the same things apply to Chuba here, but the reason that I prioritize Foreman over Hubbard is simple. D'Onta Foreman gives me the best chance to score a touchdown. We just talked about how valuable that is with Gus Edwards. Foreman is that player for this Panthers team, and I know the argument is that the Panthers aren't going to be in many situations where they're having the opportunity to score a 6-point play from inside the 3-yard line. That is the reality of the situation. However, This week, we saw some really great running from Foreman. We saw him last season fill in for Derrick Henry, and there was times where, and this might to some of you guys seem disrespectful to Derrick Henry, but there were times when, you looked at D'Onta Foreman and you saw shades of Derrick Henry, the large physical appearance and his ability to run off tackle and do some really nice things for that offense. So I'm optimistic about this year. He is definitely the power back, the goal line back for me. And Chuba Hubbard this week. So 48% rostership is what Foreman's at right now. He's a bit ahead of the curve in terms of ownership across leagues. Chuba Hubbard's at 36%, down 12% here. He did score the touchdown this week. However, it was a 17-yard scamper. It wasn't necessarily a red zone. It was a red zone play. They were inside the 20-yard line, but it wasn't a goal line set or a package or anything like that. So it was simply nice, efficient running. He broke off a tackle and ended up getting to the house. And I will say this from Chuba Hubbard. I've been often very critical of him, especially last season. For a guy who's supposed to be a shifty, explosive one-cut player, I often felt he played slow last year. I felt he was very poor in the passing game. Pass protection wasn't his strength. Couldn't break tackles. I was all over him, and that in a bad way per se. This game here, it's a 1-game sample size of his second year here as the starter heading into this game, which was his official designation coming in, and he looked better. He looked like he had taken a leap. Now, is he a high-level starter in this league? No, but again, this is a player that has utility to lineups because we're losing great players here. Breece Hall sounds like he has an ACL injury, out for the season. That sucks. Javonte Williams owners. I've got leagues where I had both of those players, and thank goodness I had on this one particular team that comes to mind. I also have ETN and Kenneth Walker on my bench who have really stepped up here as of late. But this is becoming a problem for a lot of teams where you're losing players left and right, and depth is becoming an issue. So don't take this for granted while the opportunity is out there. I was plain and simple shocked to see that with only one game being played in the Week 7 slate, neither of these players managed to make it over 50% rostership in Yahoo Fantasy. That's where I pull these numbers from because I find that their rostership numbers tend to be a bit higher than ESPN. I think that's a more accurate representation of what the market should look like here. And for Hubbard, he is dealing, so keep this in mind as well. He suffered a minor ankle sprain. It sounds like if they should need him to play, he will be available next week, and they can kind of call his number. But that is also a positive for D'Onta Foreman, because I think that what that means is that maybe some limitations in overall use if they don't feel that they need him to go, because what is this team really contending for besides the fact that technically they're a game out of first place in the NFC South, but a lot of dynamics to go at play here with Chuba Hubbard and those players. Isiah Pacheco here, our next player at 51% rostership. Now, this is technically, if we want to get really picky with wording here, a starting running back for an NFL team. This week he was named the starter for the Kansas City Chiefs offense. But there's a few things that are extremely fatal to his overall upside and what he can be as a starting level player for fantasy teams. So in and of itself, being a starter is incredibly valuable. That's something we talked through in a lessons learned episode this week. It was more so just a takeaway and a reminder that if you see availability of a starting level player in a league format where you're playing 10 plus man formats, you need to have them rostered. They need to be a part of your team. And that's not something that you can overlook. And that was kind of portrayed this week through Hubbard and Foreman here. And while Pacheco's not a workhorse, and no one in this Kansas City backfield is, it is very much so a committee. You've got Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jerick McKinnon, and Pacheco here, all seeing their respective amount of touches. He is still designated, at least as of this week, the lead back here. Now, a couple other red flags. He does a lot of special teams work in terms of returning kickoffs, and that's obviously not ideal. You don't always love to see a key player on offense is not usually going to be involved in special teams aspects of the games, especially returning wise. So taking another hit to your body and obviously getting banged up in that fashion. So a small knock there, but he did lead the team in rushing attempts. It was only 8 though. So again, putting context behind that, it was just 2 out of CEH at 6, and CEH did rip a touchdown carry off there. So, put it into context and know what it's worth here. But Pacheco being a lead back for a team designated as the team starter, impressing people at practice every day, making things happen when he touches the rock on Sundays. These are the things that are positive, and even if he's not going to contribute to your lineups today, this has an impact or the potential for an impact in terms of a long-term situational outlook here. And then finally, for our must-add running backs here for Week 8 fantasy football, we've got Latavius Murray of the Denver Broncos. It is bothering me. I cannot find for the life of me at this point in time. We are post-Sunday Night Football here for Week 7, so I just watched Kenny Pickett almost drive down the field, made a few really nice plays, but then threw a pick in the left front of the end zone. And the game was over there. But anyways, we're not talking about that right now. Latavius Murray here. I cannot for the life of me find a good picture of him in a Broncos uniform. So hopefully that pops up for the next time we talk about him here. But he's clearly asserted himself into this Broncos running back by committee style offense as the 1B back to Melvin Gordon. Now, for Melvin owners, it really sucks. I mean, you saw Latavius get the goal line nod bounce his direction, or really the touchdown just bounced his direction is more so what it was. But it's a player that is infringing upon Melvin's ceiling and creating his own space where he has viability, especially in a standard format where you just need those rushing touchdowns. And this is a guy who has the frame and the size and the skill set throughout his career that we've seen, whether it was as a Viking, a Raider, a Saint. He's been able to make things happen in a fantasy sense when given opportunities. So at 40% rostership in your deeper leagues, we're probably talking 12-plus man at this point. But there is an opportunity for utility here and for viability with your roster. So I would target Latavius Murray, especially if you're a Gordon owner at this point, because if something happens to him, that makes Latavius all the more valuable, or vice versa. Mike Boone's been scattered in there as well as a receiving back. I just get the impression that Melvin doesn't fully have the coaching staff's trust, and take that for what it's worth, because I think a lot of us think very lowly of this Broncos coaching staff. But there's the opportunity for fantasy relevance here. Wan'Dale Robinson. Let's move into some must-add wide receivers now for Week 8 fantasy football. So Wan'Dale Robinson's the first name we'll talk about here. There's a few intriguing options that could have strong flex capabilities depending on your league formats here in the coming weeks. Starting out with Wan'Dale here at 29% rostership. Again, I do get these numbers from Yahoo Fantasy to refresh. I just think that their rostership numbers are a bit more accurate in terms of reflecting what the reality of the situation should be across league formats. I feel that when looking at ESPN's numbers, they're always a bit low for my taste. So we use Yahoo here for this video, this format. Wan'Dale, what I like about him is the fact that his slot role provides the opportunity to lead this team in receiving volume on a week-to-week basis, and he is a playmaker. So while he doesn't have, the natural physical gifts that every player might have from a bodily composition standpoint, the fact that he is a much smaller player, I believe he's 5'8", 5'9", and not a 6'4" DK Metcalf running around out there. I get it that there is a limitation in terms of his contested catch win rate that he can ultimately have and stuff like that. But getting him quick off the line of scrimmage, and Brian Dable has so far done a pretty good job in spurts where Wan'Dale started to increase his playing time of getting him out in space, giving the football in three-step drop situations for Daniel Jones, easy throws, pitch and catch, all that stuff. He had 8 targets this week, caught 6 of them. He's been, turning my head a little bit the last couple of weeks here and making me consider the fact that he could be the most fantasy viable wide receiver in this Giants offense. Now, Darius Slayton deserves some respect as well. He's been a playmaker the last couple of games out here, especially it was the Packer game. He did very well, and then he had a touchdown again this week in an upset over the Jacksonville Jaguars. So there's a lot of room for opportunity here. I think that at the end of the day, this is a very low-end passing offense. I think that there is, of course, a hard-capped ceiling here, but there's no reason in a PPR format where if him and Daniel Jones, like I talked about, are playing pitch and catch, that if you have, let's say that his rostership should be after this week somewhere between 45 and 50%, that's, a lot of up to 21% of availability for Wan'Dale Robinson in terms of the league formats I actually expect to really want to go out there and target him. So I like this pickup. I think there's some usage here that's interesting. Parris Campbell moving into the Indianapolis Colts now, widely available at 4%. I think I actually, apologize for this here. I think I did a little bit of disservice to Parris Campbell this past week and a half maybe or so, getting really excited about Alec Pierce. Ever since the Thursday night game, it was an absolute, field goal riddled disaster between Denver and Indianapolis. I was really high on Alec Pierce. He's been making good plays. He's a really nice prospect coming out of Cincinnati from the 2022 draft class. But Parris Campbell has actually, analytically been on the same level, if not in some respects a higher regard than what Alec Pierce has done lately, playing 100% of the snaps offensively. And being a guy who's out there seeing legitimate volume, playing in somewhat of a mixed role between getting in a big slot situation and sometimes lining up on the perimeter as well. He has good athletic measurables and traits. His one issue, and obviously he's a very solid player. He played for the University of Ohio State, so his one problem has been health and staying on the football field. And right now seems to be kind of that breakthrough moment where He's getting out there. He's making plays happen. He scored a touchdown this week, had 70 yards on 10 receptions, 12 targets, a season high. I'd have to go look back at his numbers. That could potentially be a career high as well. You like what you're seeing. And I think at the end of the day, again, this is more so a flex play. This is a rostership scenario for teams in deeper leagues. But the argument can be made if Alec Pierce or Parris Campbell are the more valuable players. Now, of course, Pierce's role long-term with this team is a lot more set in stone. I think that he's a player the organization views from a long-term perspective, as I said, in the higher overall valuation. But that doesn't mean that today, based on Matt Ryan, the current quarterback situation, and how this offensive dynamic is unfolding right now, that he can't get there and be, a guy that is a viable contributor going forward for the 2022 season in a vacuum. Mecole Hardman here, another player at 24% rostership who's very interesting to take a look at here. Wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs, of course, has 4 touchdowns, oddly enough, in his last 2 games, something that I never thought I'd be saying here. But he's put up really good numbers. He had 6 touches this week, 60 yards, so 10 yards a touch, rushing and receiving wise. He was involved in some sort of jet motion type play or jet sweep, whatever you want to call it. And he had 3 TDs this week out here in week 7 against the San Francisco 49ers. So is this guy Tyreek Hill? No, but he's very, very quick. There's a lot of flash and dash going on here. And he's a dynamic playmaker that ultimately, when has the football in his hands, can make things happen and can have a really large impact on football games, can stretch the field vertically, runs pretty solid routes as well. He's not Devontae Adams. He doesn't have the most elite footwork in the game. He's not making guys tip over in his route tree. But with Patrick Mahomes and what he brings to the table in terms of elevating others and being that guy that takes your offense to the next level, Mecole Hardman is someone that can benefit greatly from that, have his production elevated as a result of being attached to Patrick Mahomes, and see a lot of positive externalities in that way. So Mecole Hardman, a receiver here. And then Marquise Goodwin, a longtime NFL veteran, actually did himself quite the eye-popping backflip in victory formation this week after Seattle took down the Chargers as underdogs. I believe that game is on the road as well this week, but the Chargers Stadium for Rams and Chargers fans is, you can make the argument, do they even exist? Because it feels like that stadium constantly gets taken over by the crazed away crowd. So back to business here. Marquise Brown at 0% rostership. If you're playing in a deeper format, he's going to be available. He's going to be out there in your leagues. You can go target him here. The big kicker is not that Brown, I keep wanting to say, Brown, for whatever reason, Marquise Brown, Marquise Goodwin, I don't know. Sorry about that. But for Marquise Goodwin here, the kicker is not that he scored 2 touchdowns this week and then he was very productive in this game in a vacuum. It's that he did that with DK Metcalf being off the field, if that makes sense. So if you're unaware, DK suffered a knee injury. He was carted to the locker room. He was ruled out for the game almost immediately. Then they did x-rays on that knee. They came back negative. We don't really know what the situation is yet. He's going to have more testing, so probably an MRI. And obviously just, physical capabilities and stuff like that. But should DK miss time, Marquise Goodwin, who is a very, his reputation in the National Football League has always been kind of a big play vertical threat. If DK were to miss time, Marquise becomes a viable flex option again in 12+ man leagues, maybe even deeper than that, or leagues that have multiple flex positions, super deep benches, wherever the case might be. So keeping my eye on that situation for that fact and that reason alone. He caught 80% of his targets, 4 out of 5 here for 67 yards and 2 scores on the day. And then lastly here for wide receivers, Rondale Moore at 49% rostership. This is just the opportunity to be a number 2 wide receiver in this Cardinals offense. You're seeing Robbie Anderson enter into things here. A.J. Green seems to be entirely kind of just faded and washed out of this offense here. And then you've got Rondale and DeAndre Hopkins. Marquise Brown's going to be out for a while now. It sounds like at least 4 weeks. He's on the injured reserve, so he literally can't return until week 12. Could be longer than that. You've got a position where Rondale will be starting here in a slot role. Could see more volume head his direction for that reason, and elevate his role in this offense in terms of what that means for the rest of 2022. So he's a skillful playmaker. As always, he doesn't have the largest frame as well, so isn't going to be a beast in those contested catch situations, but does have some viability and utility in terms of what he brings to this team as an explosive pass catcher and a guy who in space is very good with his legs. Jared Goff here at 58%, getting into some streaming quarterback options for Week 8 fantasy football. He's rostered in 58% of formats, so not super widely available, but chances are After this week, he will probably be dropped in a handful of leagues, so that rostership number might actually go down here. Looking ahead to this matchup, taking on the Miami Dolphins at home in Week 8, they are actually coming off of a solid performance against Pittsburgh, but that offense is pretty, low producing and kind of in a pickle itself there. What I love about this game for Goff is that it's at home at Ford Field. He's been his most comfortable. He's actually never won a road game for the Lions here, so feeling much better about that matchup from that standpoint alone. Hopefully, Amon-Ra St. Brown clears concussion protocol. He was ruled out pretty early in the game after having kind of a hard hit, obviously impacting his head. Hopefully, he can be at full strength. Should be getting DeAndre Swift back this week. Things should just be trending in a positive direction that help Goff's fantasy stock. And I know it feels super long ago. We're entering into Week 8. They haven't been a top-end producing offense since Week 4, but that was a month-long sample size of this season. The reality of the situation is he isn't a QB1, most likely. He's not going to produce elite numbers regularly, especially in those road games. But the range of outcomes is somewhere in between. He's not the terrible quarterback, an awful, unstartable fantasy producer you've seen lately, and he's not the great quarterback that was top 10 in fantasy scoring the first month of the year that you saw in September. It's somewhere in between that. It's more a high-end quarterback 2 to a middling quarterback 2 that has stream capabilities here. This matchup against Miami this week, I think, is exploitable. They've got some injuries in the back end here. I don't think that, despite the fact that Goff can be sloppy at times, I think he'll handle himself better than Pickett handled himself here in Week 7. And then famous Jameis here, 20% for Jameis Winston. A lot of availability here because of the injuries and lack of availability that he's had lately for the Saints team. Now he's been the emergency backup quarterback for the last couple of games out, backing up as the third stringer, Andy Dalton. That's fine. It's all good. They just don't want to throw him out there and get him smoked and injure his back any more than it already is. But if Dalton were to still be the starter here, I wouldn't totally, kind of turn the other cheek and ignore him. I think there is still some utility against the Las Vegas Raiders this week, which this week put up a very good performance against the Houston Texans, though, and a somewhat limited young quarterback in Davis Mills made some poor choices down the stretch of that game that really widened the margin of error for them. And then you've got a situation that for that Raiders defense, entering into this contest off of a bye week, was the third worst unit against stopping opposing fantasy quarterbacks. Otherwise, in other terms, and another way of phrasing that is, they allowed the third most points, to opposing fantasy quarterbacks. So there's opportunity to be had here. Jameis Winston is a big playmaker. We know that. That's why he's famous Jameis. It's for a reason, man. So I think that if you hopefully, fingers crossed, we don't know about Michael Thomas, but he could always return in this game. He'll have Olave most likely. He played through, not played through because the NFL doesn't let you do that, but he was able to return this past week from his concussion, have a 14-target day, 7 receptions, and put up some pretty viable numbers. I'm not really sure what the timetable looks like on Jarvis Landry right now, but the moral of the story is that this team should be getting a little bit healthier here, and Jameis is fully capable of making big plays. So is he consistent? Nope. Is his floor great? Nope. But if you need a quarterback, you're in a pinch, you've got a bye week. Herbert will be on bye this week in Week 8 here. Take a look at him. It's at least worth entertaining. And then 2 quick defenses here to talk through before I send you on your way here. We've got a takeaways episode from Week 7 as well. If you want to hear some more fantasy talk from the SFS channel, as always, smash the like button, subscribe if you're new around here. Jacksonville at 27%. This is a very underrated pass rush this season. This is a group that's really gotten after quarterbacks. And this week, they've got a hampered Russell Wilson coming off of missing a game against the Jets with a hamstring injury. Or they've got Brett Rippon, who was a backup quarterback and a low-end one at that when he played in Week 7. So we all saw it. The Jets pass rush got after him. He was antsy in the pocket. He was not really... I will say this in defense of Brett Rippon. The worst quarterback play I saw this week was Brett Purdy for the 49ers. Just airmailing swing passes to running backs out of the backfield and check downs and throwing post routes 5 yards over the guy's head, and that was pretty awful. So I don't mean to sit back here and bash on Brett Rippon, but it's potential. There is the potential that this Jags pass rush gets to approach him and play football against him this week. So that in and of itself, as well as a Russell Wilson-led offense that's been extremely poor as well, all attractive stuff to take an eye at. And then the Raiders defense here at 32%. They're on the other side of that New Orleans situation, so the quarterback play is kind of up in the air. It's a little sketchy. You can make your argument that, hey, the uncertainty factor helps the Saints. I don't know. I think that there's going to be some element of risk for both of these, but it could turn out very well for one side or the other here. The Raiders happen to have a really strong pass rush. I actually, for the first time that I can really remember after being a Cleveland Farrell fan during his, this is a Raiders pass rusher, by the way, during his time at Clemson, never really saw any flashes of him on the field. And now that he's kind of a rotation rusher and isn't really out there for all 4 downs, or at least that's not the vibe I've been getting here, is that he actually looked pretty nice here. So you've got Chandler Jones, Maxx Crosby, Cleveland Farrell. You've got some other personnel in that defense. It's not the most star-studded unit in the world. They're not the most fundamentally sound unit here, but the Saints offensive line has been very poor. They lost Teron Armstead to the Miami Dolphins. They've had their protection issues all year long. I believe Trevor Penning's on the IR as well, so they're banged up front or missing players just from, roster building standpoints here. Jameis is always due for his, interception-heavy games. Another reason that maybe they rush him back a little bit is that now Andy Dalton's coughing up the ball all here and there and, everything in between. So keep your eye on these streaming options for this week. Must add running backs and receivers as well. If you guys enjoyed, smash the like button, subscribe to the SFS channel. I appreciate you guys for sticking around with me in today's episode, and I will see you guys in another video. Peace out.